Okay, so what we're going to be doing today is we're going to continue on with our introduction to statistics. Last time was your intro to the course. This time we're actually going to start up with statistics. So first off, we're going to have a very quick overview of MyLab. We're going to be using that online resource for the majority of what we're going to be doing in this course. So it's an excellent resource. It's got tons of features. Not all of them are required for this course, but I do highly recommend just kind of poke around in there, and we'll talk a little bit about it to start off this class. And then we are going to learn the only 2 new pieces of math that you're going to learn in this entire semester. So we'll get it all over today, rip it off like a Band-Aid. It's going to be summation notation and then order of operations because of that summation notation, and then that will be it for any new math. All right, so MyLab, I used to spend the beginning of this class making sure everybody got set up in MyLab, but now with this eText initiative, you should all have instant access. So has anybody tried to get to MyLab through the Canvas system and not been able to get in there? So has everybody tried? And everybody's been able to access? All right, so that's great. That's usually what I spent the first 20 minutes of this class trying to do, so we'll have some extra time at the end. But this is what we're going to be using for the majority of this class. The coursework, the homework, the pretest, it's all going to be done through MyLab. So it's an excellent resource. It's very nicely set up. Make sure that you start to get familiar with that. So, for example, make sure that you know how to, these are screen grabs from the summer session, but make sure that you know how to use the little calendar feature right there. It will have your assignments listed, pre-test when they're due, post-test when they're due, homework assignments when they're due. All of your assignments right now are available. So you literally have the entire work for the entire course outside of the exams and 2 Excel assignments. They're literally all available right now for you to access. So just be aware of when they're due, when they're coming up. You'll see little clocks like that indicating when something is due. Everything is already available. So make sure that you know how to navigate through MyLab. The first assignment that we have in this homework assignment that we have is like a MyLab tutorial, a couple of videos and just some questions I think that you can watch and get familiar with it. So make sure that you know how to enter questions into your pre-test, into your post-test, into your homework. One of the things that I'll just mention that trips up some students initially is they require decimal places. And if they say that they require 3 decimal places, they want those 3 decimal places. So make sure that you are following those little instructions because there is some tolerance built into the system, but I don't want you getting the right answer and not earning the points. But it's wonderful. It gives you instant feedback. So as soon as you, try your homework, try your pretest, it will let you know if you got it correct or incorrect. And it will point you to the place where you can find information on what you did incorrectly. I will let everybody know about the parameters for the pretest, for the post-test, and for the homework. I'll let you know some of that later today. But yeah, basically it's the way that we're going to be handling all of our assignments. So for example, in the homework, again, if you get something incorrect, it'll let you know, sorry, that's not correct. It'll oftentimes point you to where in the book you need to go. It'll let you know what was that you did incorrect. And then you get to try the homework again. There's multiple attempts built in. I did not limit the attempts for homework because, again, we're not practicing just a certain amount. You want to practice this until you can get it right. So if you don't get a homework question correct, try it again. I believe MyStatLab will update the numbers for a lot of the questions. So it's not just going to be a matter of memorizing what the numbers are and the output and doing that, but definitely, give it another shot if you don't get it and just try it over and over again and, access the resources. It's a very nice and effective way of managing this. So as I mentioned, your first homework assignment is coming up Monday. Oh yeah, no, that's right, Monday. All right, your first homework assignment. It's always weird the first week where you're like, what are the days again? First homework assignment is coming up. This is the My Math Lab tutorial. I wanted to, again, have my assignments due midnight the day before we meet. So all our assignments are, 90% of our assignments are either going to be due midnight on Monday or midnight on Wednesday. And I just find that makes sure that students get it done, not at the last minute, so that you'll actually come to class. So again, just notice the due date, Monday, August 27th. And this is your brief intro. It's got a series of questions. It will let you know how to enter in your answers, how to work with graphs, how to pull up tables, all that kind of stuff that you'll be using later for your other homework assignments. For your homework assignments, this is the general settings that I have for every single homework assignment. So we talked about the late penalties. So you can hand in work or complete your assignments after the due date, but you will be losing 20% per day, but only to questions that you haven't finished. All right, so any questions that you have finished, they'll be graded at the due date. You'll be good with those. Any questions that you haven't finished, you can still complete them, but get to those as soon as possible. But importantly, in the spirit of practice, I did not limit the attempts for any of the questions. So if you get a question wrong, go back and try it again. If you get it wrong again, go back and try it again. If you get it wrong a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, try it again. If you don't get it after I don't know how many times, come see me in my office. That's fine. I'll help you through it. But there's no reason to not give it a try to make sure that you can, try to get it. Because a lot of times, the first time you try something new in statistics, you'll get it wrong. And the second time you try, you'll get it wrong. But the third time, lo and behold, there it is. So just know that you have those, the number of attempts has not been limited. And yeah, feel free to give it another go. For the pretest, we're going to have our first pretest due Chapter 1 pretest. Once again, Monday, August 27th at 11:59. Once again, it is available to you right now, as all pretests are. And for this one, importantly, this does not accept late submissions, so make sure that the pretests are done by the time that they're due. It's, again, designed to get you prepared for class. You do have, importantly, I want you to know that you, again, no limited number of attempts. So it's not like you're doing a pretest and I expect you to know the right answer maybe on the first try. But, try it again, give it another shot. And in terms of incomplete tests, you can have the save for later option. So you don't have to book yourself, a solid. The pretest, they estimate like a 30-minute window. And if you want to give yourself a little bit of insurance time, maybe double that. But you don't have to do it all in one go. So you can do a question here, save it for later, come back, do another question. So you got that option. So again, just make sure that you're, maybe as you're reading through the book, work through the pretest. All right, so that's basically our overview of my lab. So the first homework assignment is going to get you up to date on my lab. If you haven't already accessed it, do make sure that you can get in there. And feel free to just kind of poke around, check out some of the features, tools for success, quizzes and tests, all that kind of stuff. Just be very familiar with how to operate within my stat lab, because that is what we're going to be using for the duration of this semester. We're going to be using it extensively. All right, any questions on that? All right, one last thing that I'll mention for my lab. Please know your due dates. So there's a lot of kind of moving pieces. We got pre-tests for every chapter. We got homework for every chapter. We got post-tests for every chapter. We're going to have a new pre-test due before an old pre-test is due. So it kind of goes pre-test, homework, pre-test, homework, post-test, pre-test, post-test, home. I mean, it's built so that we can keep progressing throughout the semester. Because of that, just be aware of your due dates. They're mentioned on your syllabus. They're reproduced in the My Lab. So just be aware. I'm really hoping this semester not to get any emails along the lines of, I totally forgot we had the pretest due, yesterday, because again, they are scored at the deadline. So just be aware of those due dates. All right, so next thing on the agenda, ninjas. We're going to talk about ninjas a little bit because this is a great metaphor for what somebody with statistical skills is like in psychology. So psychology has a sort of bad reputation, maybe not unearned, but not the greatest reputation, of being the science that people go to if they don't like math. So if you don't want to do physics and you don't want to do chemistry and you still want to do science, a lot of students tend to go to psychology because of the myth, it is a myth, that you won't be using a lot of math. Because of that, because statistics requires some math, no new math, but some math, oftentimes the statistical skills of some psychologists are not that great. But statistical skills are absolutely required in psychology, regardless of your area that you go to, it's absolutely required. And somebody who knows statistics is like the ninja in any movie or any franchise. So for those of you familiar with G.I. Joe, you know that Snake Eyes, pictured here, he is the one guy that if you got a mission that nobody else can do, that absolutely needs to be done, the fate of the world hangs in the balance, who you're going to call? You're going to call Snake Eyes. He's going to be the one that goes in there against impossible odds and gets it done. In our department, our Snake Eyes is Dr. Fujita. He's the person that I go to if I'm stumped on a statistical analysis. And he is one of the greatest resources in our department because everybody has to do statistics. Everybody has to understand statistics when you're doing psychology. So this is the goal that we're going to shoot for. This is what we're trying to get to by the end of this semester. So this is the end point of your journey. And when we think about what you're going to be learning in this semester, and when you signed up for statistics, the psychology of statistics, you probably had some idea of what it is that we're going to be doing, right? So you probably had some idea of the cool things. I think they're cool. Hopefully you will as well. The cool things that we're going to be doing. And we will get there. So, for example, just to extend the metaphor a little bit, all right? This battle, you can think of this battle as hypothesis testing, all right? Those two, Snake Eyes and I think Jinx, had tons of practice. They developed tons of skills. So they can do cool things like a t-test. Those other ninjas, some of them practiced, some of them didn't. And you don't want to be that guy, all right? So in statistics, you can do a lot of cool things. You can look at experiments and you can look at data and you can collect and analyze this data and answer cool questions. You know, questions about depression treatments, questions about the influence of social media, questions about, you know, the impact of sensitivity training in police departments. Those are kind of the cool things that we want to get to. And that's what a lot of people think you're going to be doing in a stats course. All right. It's a great sequence, but we don't have time for the whole the whole thing. All right, so we will be getting there. We will be getting to that point eventually, but currently we're not ready for that, right? Currently we're not ready to tackle hypothesis testing. We're not at that place. We're not Snake Eyes yet. And where you are on your stats journey, you're a little bit closer to Daniel in the original Karate Kid. So if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. You're in for a treat. If you have, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But I'll just set the stage for you. This is you right now. This is me right now. And what we're going to be doing on this journey is basically the journey that Daniel goes through. So he was a kid. He went to a new town. He was getting beat up by bullies. He gets saved by Mr. Miyagi. And he decides that he's going to learn karate from Mr. Miyagi. So this is one of their first meetings, much like one of our first classes.
Walk on the road. Walk right side.
What?
Walk left side. Walk middle. Sooner or later, get the squish just like grape. Here, karate, same thing. Either you karate do yes, or karate do no. You karate do yes, so just like grape.
All right. That is true karate. It's also true statistics. All right. So you're in this course right now. Use statistics do yes. You do your pre-test, your post-test, you practice in class, you call me over when you have any issues or problems. That's going to be great. It's going to be successful. Use statistics do no. If you decide that this is not the time that you want to take this course this semester, you want to drop the course, that's completely fine. That's no judgment here. But use statistics do so. Kind of do a pre-test, maybe click through a post-test. Don't ask for help when you're in class. Don't do the practice Excel sheets that I provide you with. Then it's not going to turn out very well. So first thing you need to do is say, yeah, I'm in this, and I'm going to follow you on this journey. Or not my time. I'll do it another semester. But definitely, this is not the class to kind of do so.
Understand? Yeah, I understand. Now ready? Yeah, I'm ready. Yes. Let's make sacred act. I promise teach karate. That's my part.
I promise to teach statistics.
You promise learn. I say you do. No question. That's your part.
It's also your part.
Deal? Still? First wash all calf, then wax. Remember deal? No question. Yeah, but right. Wax on, right hand. Wax off, left hand. Wax on, wax off. Breathe into the nose, out the mouth. Wax on, wax off. Don't forget to breathe. Very important. Wax on, wax off. Wax on, wax off. And where these guys come from? Wax on. Detroit. Wax off. Wax on. Wax on. Right hand and circle. Wax off. Left hand circle.
All right. So, giving him his first lesson, telling him he's got to wax on, wax off. And he makes Daniel do that. He makes Daniel wax on, wax off. He makes Daniel paint his fence. He makes Daniel sand the floor. He makes, there's two forms of painting the fence. Anyway, he makes Daniel do a lot of things that do not look like karate. And the reason that he was doing it was because he wanted Daniel to do this over and over and over again. So what eventually happens is you might think that this is what we're going to be doing in statistics, that we're going to be doing like a lot of cool stuff. But I'm here to tell you at the beginning, we're going to be doing a lot of wax on and wax off. We're going to be doing a lot of sanding the floors. We're going to be doing a lot of painting the fence. We're going to be doing a bunch of this stuff. And it might not look like statistics yet. It might not be what you expected, but it's all building to a very, to a big conclusion. And did it not? Oh yeah, I know. Sorry. I messed up my own sequence. I can't believe that. All right, let's keep going. So it's all building to a big conclusion. So Daniel was doing all these things. Maybe it didn't make sense to him. You're going to be doing things. Maybe you don't understand where we're going yet. So the pretest, you're going to be doing pretests on. You're going to be doing pretests off. In-class practice on. Extra practice on. Post-tests on. Homework on. You're going to be doing a lot of things that might not look like we're really doing statistics. But in the end, what we're going for is what you're going to see here. So at this point in the movie, Daniel's been waxing the cars, he's been painting the fence, he's been sanding the floors, hasn't learned apparently any karate yet, and he's getting fed up with it, and he goes to confront Mr. Miyagi, and then this is what happens.
Sand the floor. Sand the floor. Big circle. Sand the floor. Sand the floor. Now show me wax on, wax off. Hey. Wax on, wax off. Wax on, wax off. Wax on, wax off. Concentrate. Look at my eye. Like a hand. Thumb inside. Wax on, hat. Wax off. Wax on, hat. Wax off. Wax on. Wax off. Show me interface. Up, down. Up, down. Up, down. Other side. Look eye. Always look eye. Show me penthouse. Side. Knucklist. Side. Show me wax on, wax off. That! Show me interference. Show me side to side. Show me sun on floor.
All right, so that's what we're going to go for. Okay, so in the beginning, we're going to be doing a lot of stuff that doesn't really look like stats, doesn't really look like the cool things that you might have thought that we were going to do. We're not even going to really be talking about psychology very much or psychological studies for the first part of the course. But what we're looking for is we're looking to develop those basic skills, those fundamental practices, and we're looking to get them automatic. So there's going to be a lot of kind of practice, a lot of repetition in the early going. And what we're looking for is we're looking to get to the place like Daniel did, where when a punch is coming at you, like a question on your homework is coming at you, you're not sitting there thinking, what do I do? How's it supposed to go? It's just automatic. It's just like boom, 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 boom. That's what we're going to go for, because what you want to do eventually, the stats is going to get complex, right? It's not going to be a simple question asking you for one thing. It's going to be a hypothesis test that takes 5 steps, and each of those steps has intermediate steps, sub-steps in it. So the last thing you want to be doing is thinking about these automatic things. So eventually, when we finally start hypothesis testing and you, after you've done all this practice, when you're asked to do a hypothesis test or you get a question like that on the exam number 4, instead of having to think about it, this is what it's going to look like. Alrighty, so that's what we're going for. And that's why in the beginning, again, it might not look like statistics, it might not look like psychology, but it is all building towards that final goal of developing those skills, getting them automatic, so that you don't have to think about it anymore. You just go ahead and you do it. So in terms of, again, where we're getting, you're going to get to the point where finally it's automatic. You don't have to think about it. And then when a statistics problem comes at you, it's just going to be something that you don't even worry about. Kick it to the face. And this will be you at the end of the semester. This will be me at the end of the semester looking at you going, mm-hmm. But it all begins with this repetition of tasks and things that you might not have thought was going to be a part of statistics. We're going to see psychology much later on. And I promise you, eventually we will get to the cool things. I know a lot of students, they always have these questions that they want to know. They always want to know skills that'll help them do this in psychology or help people here in psychology or answer these, profound questions that they have about human behavior. And those are awesome. And we'll get to those. We'll get to the skills. We'll get to that immensely cool stuff. But it all begins with the basics that we're going to be doing for these first few weeks. And it all begins with always doing practice, pre-test, in-class practice, extra practice, post-test homework to make sure that you're building that muscle memory in your statistical skills. All right, so let's start off with a little wax on, wax off right now. And we're going to learn some statistical notation and then the 2 new pieces of math that I promised we'll get through today. All right, so statistics has statistical notation, special symbols that it uses in statistics, and most of these are the same as just general mathematical notation. So you'll see a lot of pluses, equals, divide, all that kind of stuff. But statistics also has some specialized notation, something specifically designed for statistics. So one of those is if you want to represent all of the scores for a particular variable, statisticians came together and they said, you know what, let's call that capital X. So if you're working with 100 survey responses, you passed out a survey to 100 subjects and you got back their surveys and you scored them on those 100 surveys, you have 100 scores. And instead of saying, oh, here's a list of 100 scores, statistician says when we talk about it, we'll just say X. This X stands in for those 100 scores. When I have all of your grades for the first exam, X will symbolize all the grades for the first exam. So that entire set of grades. So whatever collection of scores that you have, whether it's a whole bunch of people's heights, whether it's a whole bunch of people's reaction times, whether it's a whole bunch of people's scores on Beck's depression inventory, whatever it is, that entire set of scores is represented by a single letter, in this case, capital X. Now this brings me to a point that I will mention over and over again, hopefully that everybody internalizes this. The worst thing you can do when you're trying to learn statistics is read that symbol as X. So don't, whenever you're reading your textbook, whenever you're reading your homework, do not read that as X. Read that as the scores. I will do that when I lecture as well. And what that will do is it will train your brain to immediately look at this and think, oh, the scores. So much the same way that you immediately look at a picture of an apple and you think apple, you're going to look at this and think the scores if you always read it as the scores. If you don't, you'll be on an exam and you'll see something like sigma x equals 12, n equals 6. What is the average? And you'll think to yourself, what's a sigma? What's an x? What's an n? But if you get into the habit of saying, oh, every time I see that, I'm going to say the scores, then eventually when you see that capital X, it'll just come naturally. It'll just be like the scores, and you'll know exactly what they stand for. So this summation notation is the first one we're learning. And again, this stands for all the scores. So it can stand for 20 scores, 30 scores, 5 scores, 100 scores, 2 million scores. It stands for every single score that you have for a particular variable, oftentimes for a particular experiment. All right, so the next piece of notation that we are going to introduce is a mathematical notation, but it's also used in stats, is summation notation. So summation of scores, adding up all the scores together, is something that is very common in statistics. Almost everything that we're going to be doing in statistics involves taking scores and step one, add them all up. So because it's very common, statisticians again said, you know what, let's have a symbol for this. And they chose the Greek letter sigma. So that is the Greek letter sigma. That stands for the sum of. And once again, in your readings, in your homework, please read that as the sum of. Do not read that as sigma. When I'm in class and I'm giving a lecture, I will refer to that as the sum of as well. So just to kind of help you get into that practice. Because when you do that and you see that notation, you will automatically say to yourself, oh, that is the sum of, and that is the scores. That is the sum of the scores. I know what that means. But if you didn't get into that habit and you're like, oh, sigma x, what's sigma x? Sigma x is meaningless to us, right? Sigma x is not something that we understand in our daily lives. But if you get into the habit of reading it as the sum of, followed by reading it as the scores, the sum of the scores, I would imagine everybody here would be able to do that today. If I said, here's a bunch of scores, Can you do the sum of the scores? You'd be like, yeah, let me get my calculator. So please make sure you do that for all notations. We're going to be introducing a bunch of them throughout the semester. Read them for what they are, and it'll save you a lot of grief, and you'll never forget them. You won't have to memorize them because they'll just automatically become part of your long-term memory. All right, any questions on the notation? All right. So that was your first new piece of math, was the summation notation. So we're about 50% of the way there. Next piece of math is the order of mathematical operations. You've all encountered the order of operations before. We need to make one change, and it has to do with the summation notation. So the order of operations that we're going to be using, first, in any complex equation, in any long equation, you do what's in parentheses first. You follow that up by doing anything in exponents. You then follow that up by any multiplication or division, and you move from left to right. So that's very important to remember. That's just a convention that everybody has agreed upon, but you start at the left and you go towards the right, much like when you're reading, and you do any multiplication or division in that order. Next is the new bit. Next, you do summation. And then finally, you do any other addition or subtraction. And what I find is that when students make errors in the order of operations, it's because they jump to step 5 and they skip over step 4. So summation with the summation symbol is basically just addition. I can understand why that error is made, because you're adding the scores together. That's like addition. So why don't I do, addition first? So the best way that I can, well, the explanation for that is because statisticians came together and they said, let's do this first. Can we all agree that we'll do this first? Yeah? Okay, we'll do that. The way that I remember it is that this sigma is kind of like VIP status for addition, so it gets to go first, right? It gets that premier pass. So whenever you see the sigma, that's like a super important addition. That's like VIP addition. So do that first, and then you do any addition and subtraction. So that's the order of operations that we're going to be doing. That is your second piece of new math. So we're done with the new math. So just to kind of give you an illustration of how you would encounter or how you would do a particular extended equation. So if we had this equation, the sum of the scores minus 1 all to the power of 2 divided by 7 times 2 minus 1. How do we do that in the correct order so that we can get the correct calculation? Well, the first thing that we do is anything in parentheses. So when you see something like the scores minus 1, what that means is that for every score, you take away 1. So whatever you're doing to, whatever's being done to the symbol X, to that notation, that means you do that to every score. So if a score was 100, it is now 99. If a score was 10, it is now 9. If a score was 18, it is now 17. And you do that for all the scores in that are represented by X. So you do parentheses, whatever's in the parentheses, then you take that value, or you take those, that equation that you had, and you do anything that has exponents on it. So in this case, you would take all those scores minus 1, and you would square them. So 10 becomes 9, and then 9 becomes 81. 14 becomes 13, and then 13 becomes 169. So you need, that's what you do next is the exponents. Then you do any multiplication or division going from left to right, and this is very important because the next thing in multiplying and dividing, first you do all of this, so whatever numbers you came out with after subtracting 1 and then squaring all the scores, those are divided by 7, and then those are multiplied by 2. So dividing by 7 and multiplying by 2 is super different than dividing by 14. That's why we got to all agree we're going to do this left to right. So that's multiplying and dividing. Then we have the step that If you make an error on this, I find about 90% of the errors come right here. The next thing is not this little subtraction down here. The next thing is any summation with the summation sign. So now, whatever numbers our scores have turned into, because of all this stuff that we did, we now take all of those scores and we add them up. So we take, 45 plus 81.2 plus 37.5 plus whatever it is that they turned into. We take all of those, and when you're done with summation, you will just have one number. So you'll take your 100 scores, you add them all up, you now have one number. You'll take your 75 scores, you add them all up, you now have one number. So you'll always be dealing with a bunch of scores until you get to that summation step. Now we only have one score. We're done with the summation. We move on to the final, which is addition and subtraction. And now whatever number we ended up, after we summed up all of our scores, we take one away from that number. And you will be astounded how often in statistics, because of the way that the universe works, you subtract one at the end of summation. So it happens all the time. Make sure that you do the summation first. It's that VIP status, and then any leftover addition and subtraction, and we're going from left to right. All right, so that is the new stuff that I wanted to cover. So what we're going to do right now is we're going to be doing a little bit of in-class practice. We're going to start with some follow-along practice, so I'll go over it up here on screen. You can follow along in the Excel sheet. It's the one that's marked O2 practice August 23rd, not the extra practice, but the practice one. So follow along. I'm going to introduce some of the ways to do order of operations with Excel and some of the specialized formulas that you'll be using in order to do that. So just so that I can handle this, let me see. Whoops. Display settings. Duplicate. Keep changing this. All right, there we go. Okay, so if you haven't already, open up this file, the Introduction to Statistics. I'm going to zoom in here on question number 1. All right, there we go. Okay, so the first thing that I just want to kind of point out is that for these kind of practice sheets, I put the scores off to the side just in case you delete scores in one of the questions and you need to reproduce them. The X, Y, and Z scores are all available there right at the beginning of the Excel sheet. So the way to think about these scores right here is, let's say that we had 12 participants and we got 3 separate scores from them. So we have 12 participants, and let's say that we were doing something in the psychology of education. Maybe we gave them a mathematical assessment, and these are their scores on that particular assessment. Maybe we tested their emotional intelligence, and these are their scores on that particular assessment. And then finally, maybe we tested their musical ability, and these are their scores on that assessment. So we got 3 sets of scores, and each of them, again, is represented by one of these capital letters. We start off with X. If we have a second set, we go to Y. If we have a third set, we go to Z. If you got a fourth set, you go to W, and then you start working your way down the alphabet. All right, let's do question number 1. For question number 1, what we're going to be asking is in these yellow highlighted cells right here. So in these practice Excel sheets, they're designed to look very much like your exams are going to look, and like your 2 homework assignments using the Excel sheets will look. Basically, these yellow cells are where your final answer needs to go. So that's where your final answer needs to go. And the first one that we want here, we want the sum of the scores. We want the sum of the X scores. So let's get to calculating that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go down here where I have this little summation symbol there. And in that cell, we're going to want to calculate the sum of the X scores. So first thing we want to do, I'll assume that none of you have used formulas in the past in Excel. First thing we want to do is we want to type in equals into that cell. Equals is your code to Excel that lets Excel know, oh, you're going to be putting in a function. So equals is your way of telling Excel, I'm about to give you a function, and then the function that we want is called sum. So we're going to be using the function called sum, and one of the wonderful things about the latest versions of Excel is that not only do they pop up suggested formulas for what they think you're trying to do, but they will also put descriptions of those formulas next to them. So if you click on them, sum SQ, it'll tell you what it does. Sum if, it'll tell you what it does. The one we want is sum, SUM, and we can double check, and it says adds all the numbers in a range of cells. Yeah, that sounds like what we want, so that's the one that we're going to go with. So we type in sum, open parentheses is the next thing that we need. That lets Excel know that you're about to give it a range of numbers. So open parentheses is your way of telling Excel, I'm about to give you some data to analyze. And then the last thing we need to do is we need to highlight and select, and there's a variety of ways to do this. So you can just click on it and use the arrow keys. You can click and drag with your mouse. Either way is acceptable. So just click on, do that one more time. You can click on the top score, and with your keyboard, use the arrows, shift and the arrows to get all the other scores highlighted. And then we close those parentheses, we hit enter, and there's our sum of scores. So those scores added together equal 518. Everybody got that so far? Alrighty. Next thing we want to do is we want to actually answer this question. So when you're answering questions in the Excel sheets that I'm using, and just in everyday life, I have this as part of the learning process because this is what you want to do literally for the rest of your life. Excel is very good at certain things, and you want to take advantage of those good things. Human beings are very bad at certain things. You want to minimize the disadvantage of those certain things. So one thing that humans are horrible at doing are repetitive tasks perfectly. So what you don't want to do in that yellow answer cell is manually type in 518. Because I have seen too many students do this work correctly, and then in the final analysis, there's a slip of the wrist, and they put in something that's incorrect. Statistics, especially statistics in psychology, needs to be right. Because if I'm working out there in the real world, and I put in a report, and I put 5.18 instead of 518, maybe a new life-saving medication is going to go back to the drawing board. Maybe somebody's going to be taking off their treatment too soon. Maybe an educational system is going to implement a new standardized form of testing that doesn't work, right? So the stats that we do help us to make certain decisions. We want to make sure those decisions are right. So do not enter it in manually. And also the other thing that you want to do is, it's not so much an issue here because that's a round number, but you want to carry with you as many decimals as you can, because you don't want to have error introduced early on in your statistical work, and then it just snowballs and gets bigger, and all of a sudden you end up with a wrong conclusion. So we want to carry as many decimal places as we can. We don't want to be vulnerable to human error. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use the equals function once again. Put equals in the answer cell. Click on the cell that you have your answer in. Hit enter, and Excel will do what it does and put your answer up into that yellow answer cell. All right, so let's do that with the scores for Y and the scores for Z. If you want to work ahead a little bit on those two, feel free, but I'm going to do it 2 more times, talking out loud so everybody can see it. So once again, for the sum of the Y scores, we put in equals, we type sum, open parentheses, we highlight all of those Y scores, we close those parentheses, we hit enter, we get 678. We are not going to put that in manually. We're going to use the equals function for the yellow answer cells. Click on 678, hit enter, and we got that answer in our yellow answer cell. And then the last one is the sum of the z-scores. So once again, equals sum, open parentheses, highlight those cells, close your parentheses, hit enter. We get a sum of 716. Not going to open ourselves to human error. Type in equals in the answer cell, highlight that, and we hit and we have the summation for the z-scores. All right. So while everybody is, I don't hear too many keyboards clacking, so probably everybody's with me right now. Is everybody at this stage? It's all good? All right. So one feature that I have in the practice Excels that I put together is you can always scroll down, and beneath the question typically, there's going to be these green cells here that'll let you know what parts of the question you got correct. So this is just a kind of instant feedback system. So when you get these right, those green sections directly underneath will say correct. When you get them wrong, you'll see little X's like that. So that's just a way of letting you know when you're practicing at home which ones you got correct and which ones you didn't get correct. Alrighty, let's start to do some order of operations. Next thing we're going to do here is question number 2. So for question number 2, we have once again our X scores. And right now we're going to deal with these 4 questions here. So we want the sum of the scores minus 1 in parentheses. We want the sum of the scores squared. We want the sum of 2 times the scores. And then we want the sum of the scores minus 1. So I'll show you how to do those in Excel. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to tackle question number 1. So what I like to do, and I'll leave you enough room so that you can do this, I like to do these things in columns. It makes it a lot easier, especially later on. And always label your columns. Another thing human beings are totally horrible at doing is remembering something that they did just like 5 minutes ago. So as soon as you're not concentrating on something, parts of our brain, it's almost like that movie Memento. As soon as you're looking away, you don't know what happened. If you don't know Memento, it's almost like Dory from Finding Nemo. As soon as she looks away, she's like, hey, what happened? Your human brain is a lot like that. So I know I'm dealing with the scores minus 1. You know we're dealing with the scores minus 1. But let's just label that the scores minus 1 so that we can jog our memory. All right. For this next part here, this is another little PSA. This is another little statistics do yes versus statistics do so-so situation. We're doing the scores minus 1. I have complete faith in everybody's ability here to subtract 1 away from a number. So I know that you could probably go and be like, all right, that's 55, that's 34, that's 70, that's 89. I know you can do that very, very easily. But we need to practice working with Excel. We need to practice working with formulas. So I urge you not to do that and to use Excel and just kind of really develop that familiarity with it. So the way that we're going to do this is we're going to put in an equals function. We're going to highlight the score that we want to subtract 1 away from. We're going to type in minus 1. We're going to hit enter, and Excel is going to do that for us. All right, so one more time, we put in equals, highlight the score that you're wanting to take 1 away from. You can highlight it either with a mouse click or using the arrows. Type in minus 1, hit enter, and then we have that done for us. So once again, equals the score minus 1, hit enter. And one of the nice things about this is that for the 12 scores, you can do this pretty quickly, typing it out. But let's say that we had 1,200 scores. You don't want to have to do this over and over and over again. So not this time, but next time, I'll show you some keyboard shortcuts and Excel shortcuts where you can get Excel to do things over and over and over and over again for you so that you can get to that rather quickly. Right now, your waxing on, waxing off, so I'll give you a little bit of time to do it for those 12. And incidentally, while you're working away, as we go through this course, we'll introduce Excel, we'll introduce SPSS. You'll have homework assigned, and I highly urge you to use the statistical packages that we're using, like Excel, to do your homework. And I know, again, the temptation will be there sometimes when you open up your homework question and it's 5 scores and you can add them in your head. I urge you not to do that. Bust out the Excel, fire it up, type the 5 scores, put in equal sum of, highlight them, get that practice so that when you finally need to do it, for example, in an exam situation, you've done it 20, 30 times already, and it'll just be automatic. All right, so we have the score is -1. So we're doing the first question there. The score is -1, so we've done what's in parentheses. No exponents, awesome. No multiplication or division, awesome. Next step is the summation. So now we're going to put in equals sum, open parentheses, highlight those scores, close those parentheses, and we end up with a sum of 506. So once again, equals sum, open parentheses, highlight those scores, close those parentheses, and we'll get a sum of 506. And we're going to finish it off by adding it into the answer cell. So we use equals, not manual, equals, highlight where our answer is, hit enter. We got 506. We can scroll on down and we see that we got that one correct. All righty. So is everybody done question number 1? All right. Let's go to question number 2. Question number 2, another order of operations. We have the sum of the scores squared. So we look at that and there's no parentheses, so we don't have to do that. Next thing on the order is exponents. So once again, we're going to do this in a column. We're going to label it. If you don't know where to find that fancy superscript, I can just whatever you need to jog your memory that is the scores squared. And we're going to square the scores. So we're squaring the original scores here. So don't get confused. We're done with this column, right? That one we're not using anymore. So now we're going to square the original scores. So once again, I know super easy. Bust out your calculator. We all know how to do squares on that. But we're using Excel. So we put in equals. We highlight the score that we want to square. And the symbol for squaring in Excel, or for exponents in Excel, is that little upwards arrowhead. It's on the numeral 6. So if you go Shift 6, that's where you can find it. That means raise that to an exponent. 2 is the exponent we want to raise it to, and that is 56 squared. So once again, equals, highlight the score you want, Shift 6 to get that exponent symbol for Excel. 2 is the exponent we're raising it to. Hit enter. 35 squared is 1,225. And once again, equals, highlight that score, 71. Shift 6 to the power of. 2 is what we want to raise it to. And we get 71 squared is 5,041. And again, promise to show you this next time. You can do that very quickly once you get familiar with Excel. All right, I can hear the keyboard sounds dying down, so we'll go on to the next step here. So we have the sum of the scores squared. We have just squared all of the scores. No multiplication or division, so we go on to the next step. That is summation. So right now we are going to sum all of what the scores have become now. So we've squared them first. Now we sum those new values. So equals sum, open parentheses, highlight all those scores squared, close your parentheses, hit enter, and we get this massive number, 32,654. Not going to try to write that out. Use the equals function in the answer cell, highlight where your answer is, and we scroll down. We got that one correct as well. All right, next one. 2 times the scores. So once again, same kind of procedure. We're going to go here. We're going to do it in one of these columns. So label it. Make sure that you label your columns when you're working on it, because you will be surprised how soon you forget what it is that you were doing. And we're going to basically ask Excel to multiply these. So 56, multiplication is the asterisk. That's on Shift 8. So that's the symbol for multiplication. We want to multiply it by 2. Hit enter. 56 times 2 is 112. So we'll do for the next one, equals, highlight the scores. Remember, we highlight the original scores. So when it just has the X, that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with the scores. So we highlight the original score of 34, Shift 8 for the asterisk, multiply that by 2, and we hit equals, and one more time, equals, highlight your score, Shift 8 for the asterisk, 2 is what we're multiplying it by. We hit enter, and we multiply 71 by 2, it's 142. And we do those for the remaining scores. All right, once again, I hear the dying down of keyboard clacking, typing, I guess. All right, so we've done the sum of 2 times the scores. Actually, we've done the sum of 2 times the scores. Next step is the summation. We've done 2 times the scores. Next step is the summation. So once again, equals sum, open parentheses. We highlight 2 times the scores, close those parentheses. We get that summation of 1,036. Not going to enter that in manually, so equals, highlight that, and we got 1,036 as the sum of 2 times the scores. Scroll all the way down, and we got that one correct. All right, one last one. So we have the sum of the scores minus 1. And I included this one because it looks a lot like this one, but it is completely different. So this is the sum of the scores. This is the scores minus 1, and then sum it up. This is the sum of the scores minus 1. So be aware that this happens over and over and over and over and over again in statistics. So just be aware of it. Don't fall for the trap where you do the subtraction first and then you do the summation. So that's what we did here. This one with the parentheses, That was subtraction first, and then summation because the subtraction was in parentheses. When you don't have those parentheses, nothing in parentheses, go to the next step. No exponents, go to the next step. No multiplication and division, go to the next step. Summation is the next step. So we are going to sum the scores. So we have the scores right there. So we can sum the scores directly underneath, make it easy. So equals, sum, open parentheses, highlight those scores right there. We get 518. And then we can either do it in another cell, or if you have just like one step that you know you can do, you can also put that in the answer cell. We want now Excel to calculate out the sum of the scores minus 1. So sum of the scores minus 1, 517. Sum of the scores minus 1, 506. So please do not fall for that. Don't fall for that trap. You'll see it over and over again. It's the most common mistake. Doing that subtraction or addition before summation is the most common mistake. Don't let it happen to you. And if you did this one correctly, you'll see that you got correct right there. All right, so that is it for the sort of follow along demo. Right now, I just want to point out that we have more questions on this Excel sheet. So this one over here, this is the one that we mentioned in the lecture notes. You have enough column space in order to accomplish this. And if you can get the correct answer on this following the order of operations, you're in very good position, right? You're basically in a very good position to move forward onto the next lesson. So give that one a try. And then also, if you really want to test where you're at, this is a little bit of overkill, but I recommend you give it a shot. It's good practice. Here we have summation when we're dealing with two sets of scores. So when you're dealing with two sets of scores, when it says the scores, those X scores minus the Y scores, that means that you take that X score and you subtract the corresponding Y score. So we have scores for participant 1. They scored a 56 on X. They scored a 90 on Y. What's 56 minus 90? That's what this question here is asking. Same way you can multiply scores together. You can take the X score multiplied by the Y scores to 56 times 90. And then everything else is pretty much what we've seen already. So this is also some additional practice that you can do. And then finally, this one is kind of like the Uber challenge. So you can give that one a shot if you're feeling frisky. So that's what I wanted to cover today. So let's just kind of wrap it up, and then we'll have the last few minutes for a little bit of practice time. We'll also have some practice time next class as well. So if you don't finish with the Excel sheets, feel free to kind of work on them next class when we're in here practicing. And also for any of these practice sheets, you're not handing these in. So this is for you to practice, to try it out. Scroll down to the bottom, see if you got it right. If you didn't, scroll back up, try it again. But these do not need to be handed in at any time. But they're just for you to basically be able to practice. So there's that practice sheet. There's the extra practice. So an additional sheet of very similar type of questions for order of operations. So you can give that one a try as well. All right, and in addition to that, I just wanted to make sure that everybody is aware of the MyStatLab study plan, specifically the Quiz Me option. So one of the things that MyStatLab does, which is a great feature, it has this study plan that analyzes what you already know and what you don't know, and then suggests work and quizzes based on what you don't know. Right? So if you've already mastered summation, it won't suggest that you try a summation question, but if you're struggling with averages, it'll give you an average question to go and try. That's the study plan. Within that study plan, though, you have the Quiz Me option. So the Quiz Me option, you can find it, there's different ways to get to it, but the Quiz Me option is the one that has typically five questions. That is the entire array of questions. So not not what MyStatLab kind of identified as your weaknesses that you need to practice, but basically everything from that particular chapter. So the Quiz Me option, there are 4 specific chapters. All right, so you'll see here for chapter 0, which is the orientation, the one that you'll be doing today. There's specific online exercises that you can do to practice how to interact. They have those for every chapter. All right, so for chapter 1, there'll be Quiz Me options. For chapter 2, there'll be Quiz Me options. Those are the ones that you need to complete in order to get the 100% on your pretest. So if you ever do not get 100% on your pretest, you can go into the MyStatLab, go to the Quiz Me option, finish the Quiz Me questions, and what I will do is I will take your maximum score on either your pretest or on your Quiz Me performance. So if you get 60% on the pretest, but you get 100% on the Quiz Me, you're getting 100%. If you get 100% on the pretest, but you want to practice on the Quiz Me and you only get 50%, you get the 100% for the pretest. So the Quiz Me scores that you get are going to be used to replace your pretest scores if you get higher on the Quiz Me options. I don't know if I can explain that any more complicated. Basically, it's the best of the 2 scores. That's what we're going to be looking for. All right, so that is it for today. We have about 8 minutes left in the class. So if anybody wants to give those Excel sheets a go, feel free. If you're kind of statsed out by now and you want to give your mind a rest, feel free as well. But if you have any questions about anything, if anything didn't work out with the Excel sheets while we were going through those, now would be the time to call me over. I'll come by and we'll make sure that everything is working out. Other than that, I'm done what I was looking to cover today.